Thanks for joining our Oracle Digital Assistant webcast. I'm Jürgen Kress, part of the Oracle Product Management team. Today's webcast is the fourth in a series to create better enterprise chatbots. The webcast is live and on-demand recordings are available. For details, please see our newsletter and subscribe to the Oracle Video Hub channel. In today's presentation, Frank Nymphius and Daniel Teixeira will give us tips to design conversations.
Guten Nachmittag, Frank. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well. Hope everyone does feel the same. So it will be an interesting session today.
Great. So you will include some demos?
Well, I try my best.
And welcome to the call, Daniel. Daniel will help us with questions and answers. So if you have questions, please post them anytime in the Zoom Q&A tool. Based on Oracle Digital Assistant, bots can be developed or pre-built SaaS skills and templates. For example, HCM or Oracle Service can be leveraged and extended. Conversation Designer replaces YAML and allows developers to design conversations by drag and drop. Objective of the webcast is to provide you guidance to build better digital assistants. So let's get started. Our team is supported by Arti. Arti is an Oracle Digital Assistant, and you can try it out yourself at bit.ly/ODA documentation. On the lower right, you will find Arti, and Arti will answer all your questions about Oracle Digital Assistant. Quick housekeeping, please feel free to post your questions via the conference Q&A tool or Twitter #partnercommunity. At the end of the webcast, we will answer them. Slides will be available at our Video Hub channel and community website. Please share your feedback via the Zoom survey at the end of the webcast. Today's webcast is live and is recorded. It will be published at Oracle Video Hub. We also would like to invite you to join our Customer Success webcast series. In the next webcast on January 24th, we will give you an update on how to build dashboards and combine them with Oracle Digital Assistant. For details, please visit the registration page at bit.ly/ODA success. At Cloud Marketplace, you can also search for Oracle Digital Assistant, and you can find pre-built bots like a bot from Intra-C for universities. Questions, need support, collaborate at Oracle Cloud Customer Connect. In discussion forums, you can share your knowledge, engage with industry experts, and network with peers. You can also submit your questions and innovations. All details are published in our quarterly newsletter. Please subscribe to get invited to upcoming events, customer success stories, and best practices. For partners, we would like to invite you to join the developer partner community to receive our monthly newsletter.
With this short introduction, over to you, Frank.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from my side. As Jürgen said, my name is Frank Nymphius. I'm from the Oracle Digital Assistant Product Management team. And I got the honor to continue this session about best practices, covering design conversations, which more or less means dialogue flows in Oracle Digital Assistant. So before I show you the table of content, so let's check what the learning is so far for those who attended all of the sessions or watched the recordings. So we started out with giving you the basics of what really makes a great digital assistant, what are the sweet spots, what really makes sense to have a digital assistant to cover and to handle. We talked about the anatomy of a conversation, good practices, bad practices. We hopefully educated you enough on designing conversations so that you understand the difference between web application design and conversational design. In the second session, then we talked about intents, which is important, especially knowing that conversational chatbots are all driven by machine learning. So we need to get the understanding of how you train those machines so that they resolve the user intent. And then this goes hand in hand, of course, with what are testing strategies and how can you make sure that the quality of the model is so that when a real user works with your digital assistant, the user is successful. And then we covered answer intents, which is one of the, I guess, the most wanted feature for people beginning with digital assistants. How do I build a frequently asked question chatbot? So we covered that, and we followed up on this model topic with entities that was covered, I think, 3 weeks ago. We did talk about how to extract information. What is it that entities are good for? We showed you the built-in entities as well as the entities that you can build to mirror your own use case and business. But we also showed you use cases for entities, starting from validating user input up to driving the conversation in form of a composite back entity. And in these 3 sessions, we kind of created the picture of model-driven conversations as well. So, and I will come back to that later as well. So this is what we covered. And then the natural next session that we have today is to talk about how to get from a conversation design and a model into a real digital assistant conversation. So we'll cover the transition from a conversation to a dialogue flow so that you understand this. And I understand that many of you watching this or attending the session live, your experience with Oracle Digital Assistant with skills, but I want to make sure that we cover everything from the ground up, because when we talk about best practices, there might be something that you think you understood, you might not understand well enough, and that will then turn into a best practice. We will follow then with dialog flows in Oracle Digital Assistant. So how do you build them there? There's a new feature that we're covering, which is Visual Flow Designer, and then specific topics that are surrounding the Visual Designer flow-to-flow navigation, as well as, especially if you're coming from a previous version of Oracle Digital Assistant, then how to access NLP's result variable, because some architectural changes happened in the visual mode that I will talk about. And at the very end, I will have a set of slides that will just give you a kind of condensed set of best practices as we experience it and as we use this in our day-to-day work with Oracle Digital Assistant. So let's talk about how do you get from a conversation into a dialogue flow and how they relate. We had this example when we talked about entities. So we have this nice young lady ordering food, and so she's giving some additional information like the curry sauce, the salad, and the French fries she wants to go with it. And then the waiter magically, really magically understood that apparently, though she said I would like, she meant I want to order food. Yeah, so he's mapping I like to an order, but also recognize that the main dish is the fried cod, and then side dishes are salad and French fries. And what he also recognized is she didn't order a drink. So as a follow-up, the waiter will ask for, what do you like to drink? So how would a machine be able to do the same? And again, when I talk about the machine, I'm talking about the combination of everything, the model that needs to understand, as well as the flow in which the model interacts as if it was the waiter. So this would be the sentence that the lady said. So I like, so that would resolve into an intent, and that intent might be an order intent. So the use case when you design the bot definitely helps to make sure that I'd like is not understood as anything else, because if it's in the context of a digital assistant taking orders, then anything giving the impression of I want to have something would mean I want to order. So that's what the intent is doing. If it's well trained, entities are used to extract information about the main course. Of course, if you have something like a large menu, you would use ML entities that we talk about, but then you might also have very sophisticated entities, value list entities, dynamic entities that probably would just catch the sides of this. Now, the question is, what about the drinks? And here is where the conversation flow in a digital assistant, specifically in a skill, comes into play. So the conversation that you design will be implemented as a dialogue flow in Oracle Digital Assistant, and more precisely, it will be implemented in the skill. And if the user gives you the full sentence, like I like the fried cod with curry sauce with salad and French fries, then everything will be slotted. And we talked about entity slotting last time. So the machine learning model will understand that this information was already provided and will not prompt for it, but it will recognize that the drinks are missing. So it will then display a prompt asking for what drink should go with the meal. If the lady just would have said, I like the fried cod, then the dialogue flow in our case now will prompt for the sides as well. So it will ask any sides to go with it. And then she would probably say salad and French fries. So this is how the dialogue flow plays into this. So in summary, if you look for key terms and something to learn and repeat, a dialogue flow defines the narrative of the conversation a digital assistant can have with a user within a skill. It's like a script, like a playbook, going in all sorts of directions, not just following a single path, but being prepared to handle all kinds of things that could happen in a conversation, if well designed. So about dialog flows, as I said, there are scripts and they cover the happy path as well as the unhappy path. So the happy path is where an order will have everything in it, and we can directly go and place that order. And the unhappy path is where the user does something that doesn't really fit to the main path of ordering something, asking a question in between, or not providing enough information. Usually, the dialog flow begins with the intent that gets resolved. So if we have an order intent, then that will resolve into a dialog, and this dialog will then start it and will just show different states, as we call the interaction points between the user and the digital assistant. And each of the states could be a prompt, could be a message, a value list, whatever. With whatever the user is displayed and clicks on or responds to, that will be saved in a variable. And if the variable is associated with an entity, then here again we use entity slotting. So like if I'm prompted for a meal and then you give me, like in my demo, that will be pasta, I will display you spaghetti bolognese, and you would say, I want to have the spaghetti bolognese. Then only spaghetti bolognese would be extracted. And that is what variables of type entity would do. And if everything goes well, at the end of a dialog flow, usually either you provide an answer or you make a call to a backend service for all kind of CRUD operations. I mentioned that there is the approach of a model-driven conversation, and in the entity session, we talked about composite back entities that would render and model real-world objects. And an order is a real-world object because it has, in our case with the restaurants example, it will have the food, it will have the drinks, and it will have the sides. So that could all be kind of grouped. So the question is, if I do this in the entity, how would that relate to a dialog flow? Well, as you can see on the right-hand side, and we had the same slide in the last session, I can have a dialog flow where one of the states references this composite back entity, this group of entities, this real-world object. So what it will lead into is that you have more control of the conversation, better ways of validating things, also the ability in between to call to remote REST services to do queries or validations. And in summary, it will reduce the number of steps that you have to build in the dialog flow. So the both work really, really well together. And this is why we say that use composite back entity to drive conversations as part of our best practices recommendation, but you always will have the dialog flow. So how does the visual mode in Oracle Digital Assistant that we recently introduced relate to dialog flows? And that's a good question. So what is visual mode? Now, if you are experienced with Oracle Digital Assistant, then you know that in the past we worked with a single document that was a YAML document, kind of a metadata document. If this is the first time you learn about Oracle Digital Assistant, forget about YAML. Yeah, visual mode is a second option now, and this visual in the visual mode as all that I need to say, because we are taking away the burden of metadata programming into a visual design experience. But with this, we also change the architecture. So visual mode has a different way of building skills, and I will show you that in the demo and on the slide as well, which is more event-driven. Instead of having one single document, we now have multiple documents, and each of the document is a dialog flow. But these documents can link each other, which means that now you can partition the dialog flow into even reusable flows. The team development experience is improved by this because now you can have different members of the team working on different areas of a skill. So before that, you could only partition your teams on the skill level so that they're not getting in their ways. Now you can do this on the flow level, which is a lot more fine granular. We always had state templates that were giving you the base configuration of a prompt, a list of value, or whatever you wanted to do. Now in this release, these templates are more focused on what you want to do and not how you want to do it. Yeah. So in the past, it was that we were kind of putting metadata in that had a component exposed and the component properties, and you had to figure out what are the values that you need to set. So now these templates that we have right now, they are use case oriented. So you want to print a message, there's a template for that. You want to resolve a composite back entity, there's a template for that. And that's all that you think. We also have improvements to the answer intents. One of the common requirements that people have is that after displaying an answer to a question, you might want to follow up asking the user about whether that was helpful or not. Thumb up, thumb down, whatever you want to do. Or you want to ask the user for additional feedback and then lock this away. Now, this requires the answer intent to be answered in the context of a flow, which by default it is not doing, because right now, by default, and that makes sense, the answer intent will automatically display the answer if you just type it. So you don't have to create a flow. But then if you want to extend it, you would need to create a flow. And this is what Visual Mode provides a much better implementation of. And last but not least, the key of this whole architecture is the Visual Flow Designer, making it possible and available to everyone, the coding, without really knowing what the components are that we use. So let me start my demo. And first of all, let's start by creating a new skill. As usual, it asks you for the display name, a name of the skill, the version, and you could put any version in here so you can come up with your own scheme, because underneath it uses its own sequencing. But the most important part is that you have the option YAML or visual, and this cannot be reverted. So once you decide for one of the options, you stick with that in the skill. It cannot be undone. By default, it's visual because that is what we recommend you going onward. And if you choose visual, what it will create is what I already prepared here. So let me switch here. So it doesn't create any intents. It doesn't create any entities out of the box, but it will create the basics of the flow. So there's a main flow, and I will cover that, what that means. And there is a base implementation of an unresolved intent, which is if the intent doesn't understand what the user wants, then this would probably just print, sorry, I didn't understand. So this is what you get out of the box. And let me, before starting building flows, cover some more content here. So what we do is, and I mentioned this in the new architecture, we work with multiple documents where every document is a flow. And the flows in combination make the conversation. And as I could see from the image on the right-hand side, flows can call each other. So this would allow us to have like a top-level flow calling in a utility flow. And this utility flow can even be shared between different flows so that you can have a lot reviews happening now in your skill development. Still, a skill can consist of a single flow if you still want to go with that, but we don't recommend. We recommend actually to use multiple flows. Flows consist of flow states indicated on the right-hand image as the circles, and every state either is an interaction point between the digital assistant and the user, or it executes logic. Yeah, you could have a switch statement where based on the user answer, you want to make the decision, do I go with that road or do I go with that road? And that's what the states are doing. Each state actually is configured to use a component. The component actually is responsible for doing the right thing, either doing the logical operation or to display user interfaces, but you don't have to bother about that. And for that reason, the new templates no longer expose you to what the name of the component is. As I said, we're more use case oriented now. We're not making you think. So that's the key point. But the states will actually result in some sort of follow-up action. And this follow-up action, which could be a component action, like in a switch statement, you will have like 2 possible outcomes, and each possible outcome can be mapped to a next state, which is where you then branch the conversation, or it will just go to a next transition. So nothing has really changed from this concept. So if we look into what state really contains, so we have the component, as mentioned, we're not exposing it to you, what the component itself is, unless you build a custom component. A custom component is what you build with Node.js and JavaScript. If there are some specific custom logic that you want to be executed in the context of a dialog flow, or if you want to have a specific rendering that is based on some information that comes from a backend system, then you create a custom component. For pure backend access, you no longer need to build custom components because we have a REST component that is available out of the box. Now, each of the states, as it's now kind of exposed, will expose properties, and these properties are to configure the behavior of the component that is underlying. Yeah, and you use this either to update a variable, or you use that to change the behavior of the component, or even the rendering of the component. And as I mentioned, the next stage or the next state within a flow is always navigated to either following the next transition or one of the actions that comes out of a component performing logical operations. There are not different flow types because physically every flow is the same. If you build one dialog flow, it has exactly the same physical nature as any other. But from the use of it, there are maybe some semantic or categorization that you can do. So in our projects, we typically refer to the flows that are top-level flows that are mapped to an intent as intent flows. And they are aware of context. So if I have an intent of type order, then the flow that it triggers will be aware that it is about creating an order. Similar, if you want to cancel an order, then that flow will be available about canceling an order. So those flows typically are not reusable because they make assumptions, they know the context, but they then call subflows. And the subflows are like libraries. They have an input parameter or a set of input parameters, they have output parameters, and everything else that happens in between is an implementation detail. So the user, when you go into the subflow, will see prompts, messages, select options, and so on, but it is not transparent to the intent flow, so the top level flow. So we just call into it and we'll receive a result at the end. And then we do have what we call global flows. This is a system level events like answer intents. If you want to handle this in a flow, then we call these global flows. And all that this really has is it will be mirrored in the naming convention that I will introduce to you later on. But I want to move on with the slides so I can get to the demo and then show you how you build this. Now, before I can do this, I need to tell you about one very specific flow, which is the main flow. And you see the screenshot of the browser development environment. Now, the main flow is not a flow. It only called main flow. So what it does is it maps specific events, and even the resolving of an intent results in an internal event. And that allows it to map an intent to a flow that you created. So all that it's about is mapping specific events to a flow, but also to define skill level variables. Now, if you're from a YAML world, so if you're an existing customer of Oracle Digital Assistant, then you know that at the end of a conversation in a YAML flow, all of the variables that you defined for that flow are reset. And then if you needed to persist some information, you had to reach out to a broader scope, like profile or user scope. Now here we have the skill scope, which is an additional scope. So if a conversation in one of the flows that you build ends in that the flow is exit, then all of the flow level variables are reset, but the skill variable will still be there. So that will give you a scope that spans several conversations, and you can then save information there that you want to use and access throughout your conversation. So that's a difference. So the main flow is not a flow, but it's the key of everything. Here's a graph that shows and indicates, so we have intent event mappings. So they will, for a specific flow, like the create flow, the cancel flow, the lookup flow, will reference a specific flow that you create. And then for the built-in events, so we have the frequently asked question flow, which is an answer intent flow. Then we have start skill. So if your skill is called from a digital assistant, then the start skill is what always will be, or actually the start flow, it should not be skill, it should be flow, is resolved always. So if you need to do some preparation, like querying context information about the user, then you would do it there, and you would actually link that to its own flow. And this is how you control it. Okay, so all theory is gray. So let's look into something more colorful, which is to build something. I used quite a lot a demonstration called Pasta Alfredo, and I built this with YAML. And I thought for this session, it would be great if I could at least try to build parts of that with a visual flow diagrammer. And hopefully at the end of this session, I will be able to have it all created. So let's see how well I'm doing here. So before I start, let me show you what I pre-created. So I created intents. I have 2 answer intents, and I have 1 order pasta event. So that's a regular intent. So the naming convention allows me to tell what is what. So here's at what terms do you deliver pasta? So if I would run this in the tester, what are the terms for delivery? then this is the default behavior of answer intents, that even though we have a flow defined yet, we are able to see answer intents. But if I wanted to do a thumb up, thumb down, no option here. And I will show you later how that could be implemented. And then I do have a model defined, and this actually, well, the model is the intent and the entities here, but I have entities defined. I have composite back entities. One is the delivery contract, which is just like asking for the name, the address to deliver it. And then the main is the real world object, which is the pasta order. So you order a pasta, a size, extras, and quantity. And then I have a list of extras. So this is how I can validate the extras that are available. And very important, I have one value list that is a menu options. So one of the things we talked about when we talked about entities was to create mature action menus, and that entities could be used for that. And the way that you do this is that you create a value list entity, and then if the user presses a button, then that will do the navigation anyway. But if the user says something that is relative to the button, like if you have an order button, anything that you envision, any word that you envision could reference an order, could be used as a synonym, and then it would be like as if the user would have pressed the button. So this is what I prepared. So I have my model set up, but the key really is like to show you how you build things. So first of all, I want to create one. No, I don't need that. So let me start with building the flows. So one flow I want to have is I want to have one flow as the intent flow, and I have one intent to map. This is called the regular order pasta intent. And the naming convention I prefer using is I put intent in front of it. Yeah, and you can come up with your own naming conventions. And at the end of the session, I will talk about naming conventions. But naming convention is something very personal. So that's up to you to decide what you want to go with. We always recommend you type in the description. So for the interest of time, you will not see me putting descriptions in, but it's always good to document for the copywriter and the code reviewers what a specific intent or specific flow is doing. So I create this. Then what I will do is the next one, and for this I need this again. So I create a service implementation. You can imagine that ordering a pasta could be accessed from the intent, where the user say, I want to order. But what if the user goes in differently and says, I want to cancel my order. And at the end, when the cancel process is all through, you say, did you change your mind? Maybe you want to reorder something. And then there might be a transition into this. So I make this as a separate flow. And you already sense the feeling of, oh, reuse, right? So that's great. So I just call it service, as everything that's not intent related, I call service. I'm not mapping it to any intent name because this is not supposed to be called directly. So this will be called from other flows. And then I have another flow, and the way or the granularity of flows, that's up to your design. So for the purpose of this this session here, I decided to go very fine granular. So let's go order menu. So that is where I prompt for whether you want to place additional orders or not. And let's create one other. And this is the service place order. So this is at the end of the order flow. When everything is fine, that you selected your pasta and you said, no, I'm willing to get this delivered, then that flow will help you with prompting and providing the address for where it should be ordered to. All right, so we created this. So let me quickly go back to my slides, because what we need to do now is, in order for me to explain to you what will happen in the demo, I needed a more complex graph, but hopefully that also will increase the understanding. So the main flow, as I explained, it has global variables, it has event mappings, and then we have flows. I created 4 flows, and each of the flows can call each other if needed. Yeah, I can imagine that the service order rec order pasta flow will have to call the order menu flow. So that would be a sensible call for me to make. So the user message comes in, and this will hit the intent engine, and the intent engine will then say, okay, based on the user message, I understand it's this intent. Because it's this intent, passing it over to the dialog engine, the dialog engine will say, we map it to this top level flows. And if there is an external event, like an application initiated event coming from the outside, some other application calling us, then again, this mapping on the main flow will tell which flow to call. And this is what we do in the demo, except for the external events. So I will have one intent coming in, which is an order flow, and that will go to its starting flow. And from there, it will use subflows to fulfill the order. What could happen is, and I will show that in the demo as well, that one of the flows returns a directive, an action string to the main flow. So it says, I'm finished with my work, but I finished successful, or I finished with a cancel or a failure. Now, in the success case, what I want to do is I want to call, in the success case, I want to call the place order flow. Yeah, so it's not mapped to an intent. So I will wait for the order to be completed, and the order will tell the main flow that now it can call the order flow, the place order flow. And you see already from the choices that you can make in your design that the new visual mode architecture gives you a great tool at hand for that. So you can really build better bots with this. And then the global variables could be referenced from parameters. So if I invoke a flow, then this flow can use expressions to reference global variables to share information from that. All right, so before I go into the longer part of building this application, so let me cover very briefly, and I know that I'm stressing the term briefly, the Visual Flow Designer. There are some UI things you need to know. First of all, it's all declarative, and that's what I'm going to show. It's use case oriented in terms of the templates, and all of the functionalities exposed as a property. That is what I said here so far. You have the ability to copy and insert flow sequences. So if you have a sequence within a flow that you find is good to reuse or to copy and paste into another flow, you can do that. You can also export whole flows and import them into different skills. So let's start with the guided tour. And the guided tour is one of the reasons why I have at least 20 slides that I don't have to show. The guided tour is part of the product. You click anywhere into the panel of a flow, and it will pop up with a dialog that you see 3 of here that will explain exactly how you build the flow, exactly how do you get to add a new state, how do you choose a new template, and so on. So everything will be covered there. What it doesn't cover is that there is an option to zoom in, because you can imagine that if you build declarative flows, that you have a lot of states, and eventually you have like 30 states and everything becomes small and tiny. There's a way to zoom in. You can just use the control key and then move the mouse, or use the wheel on the mouse. But to quickly zoom out, you will have this thumbnail view. Just double click on that and it will go back to the overview. To add dialog flow states, and that's what the quick guide will tell you. There are 3 dots on every state. If you click on this, a submenu opens. It has an add state menu option. And then as you see, by use case of what you want, we have sub-templates or templates that you select and then just add and through properties configure later on in the panel. And you will see me doing this in the demo. There are flow level configurations, and that's a specific section in the flow that always exists. One is where it will auto detect if a flow requires an authorized user. It's a configuration setting on the flow where you can say this flow must be authorized, in which case you can link it to a flow that uses the OAuth2 components to perform authentication. Dialog errors, which usually happens if there is a misconfiguration, but more frequently happens if you build your custom components and your custom component has a bug and freaks out, then a dialog error will be called, and you can map it to a flow that gracefully handles it, or maybe give the user the way to report it. Unexpected user input, not so specifically here. Typically, is if you have a list of value without entity backing, then if someone types a value that's not in the list, then you can respond to that and assume, well, maybe that's a new intent to follow up with. And then we have add custom transitions. Now my example where in my demo at the end, when the order completes, it will talk to the main flow and say, look, I'm done and I'm done successfully. You can now ask the user for the address. Now this is what a custom transition is. So and you can have the custom transitions on all layers. That could be on the main layer. They could also on the main flow layer. That could also be on this individual flow layer. If you delete something, and I at least tend to be very quick with deleting things, and I'm also very quick in regretting things. So there's always, when you delete something, be it deleting a flow or a state, there's an undo function that shows as an alert on the left button. So if you click this, then the state will be recovered. So you're not losing work. Here's an example of how you would copy states. So here I have a check people availability state, and this has some other end flows, and I will cover end flows later. If I click on the three buttons, select the copy state, then it opens a dialog. It will show me exactly what it will copy and ask me then to select the flow where I wanted to copy this into. And there is a group called disconnected flows where this will end in. And then all I need to do is just to create a transition into the check people availability node to wire this up and make it part of my overall flow. All right, so now it's where the longer part of my demonstration starts. So I need to fill this a little bit with life. So no guarantee that things won't go bad here, but I do my best that they work as I spec them out. So every flow you create has this event block, and I showed you that on the slide, and it has a start state. Now this does not do anything right now because it's empty. So for an intent flow, what's typically a good thing to do is to just print a message like nice that you're here or whatever. So I can select the send message template, and let's call this intro message. Again, I'm not providing a description. You should. And one thing I'm doing in the interest of time is I'm not dealing with resource bundles, though the best practice recommendation is that every message, every prompt that you show should come from a resource bundle so that it can be, first of all, translated. But second, think about copywriters. They will have it easier to review resource bundles and not go through all of the flows and understand where the messages are. So here I would say, welcome to Pasta Alfredo. How can I help you today? Okay. Clicking outside of it, and that's the first step. So now I have a message. So if I would now say I would like to order pasta, then at least I would get a welcome screen, but that's not enough, right? So what I want to do is I want to have the full conversation going. And what I need to do is I need to create variables for that because I need to have state somewhere captured. And this is what you do on the configuration tab. Then you see you can specify parameters, event mappings. Event mappings would, for instance, be to map if an unauthorized flow access is detected, where it should go to authorize it. So I'm not using this, but I want to create a variable. And the variable I want to create is orders. So this will be my shopping cart, and it's of type list. So one of the things that we do here is we are very strict. So we enforce types. So that means that in the past, when you defined a variable and you defined it as a map, and then you put a string in there, we say, okay, hello and welcome. But now we are very strict here. And we do this for custom components as well. I could specify an initial value for the list. So I could either use a JSON format, in which case I would just type a JSON list in here, or I can use an expression, an Apache FreeMarker expression. So if the variable should be initialized from a skill level variable or from whatever I have available, I can do it in here. So I don't need that. So, but what I can do is, I know it's a list, I can create at least an empty list. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create an order item. And that is where within the conversation, I will in the end save what I extract from it, and then every order item in the end will end up in the card. And this one here then is of type map, because it's an object and I can create it as an empty object. You will leave this empty if you do any kind of null comparison or something, but in my case, that could be empty. So there's another variable I need. It's a kind of special one. So there is one of the states which is a reset variable state, and this resets like known variables that you configured in the flows, so all declarative. But there are some system variables that you might want to reset. And one of the things I just recently learned, which is quick and easy to do, is to create a variable and just leave that empty. Yeah, so this way, whatever I want to reset, I simply say, okay, copy that value into that value, and boom, it's reset. So it's more of a niche case, and we will definitely have a better option in one of the next releases to perform this kind of resets. But for now, this is what I needed, and that is what worked for me. So what I want to do next is I have the intro message here, and the next step would be to start the order process, which, however, I defined as a subflow. So I didn't cover it yet on how to create invoke flows. So let me add a state, make it a send message, and just call it to do. Just adding my own placeholder here. And then the next step, so if I'm coming back from the order process, I want to persist this. And for this, what I use is I use the custom components. So I go in here and say, okay, add another state, go here to the service integration. And one of the many service integrations I can do is custom component. So this would be then add order to card. Again, description, always do that. So the custom component actually has a bunch of properties that is defined in the custom component code. And here I'm displaying all of these, and I created an item that holds the order item when it's selected. So in this case, I would do order item dot value dot quantity. And as you all spotted, that needs to be an expression. Okay, so that's like the quantity. Then I have one for the cost. Unfortunately, the pastime selling is not free. That would be then the size that you want to give. So we have quantity, cost, and size. Then the pasta. And then I need to put it somewhere. Now, and what I want is that the custom component adds this order to the orders list. Yeah, so this is a variable reference, and then my custom component would know how to do it. And here I have another one, which is extras. So, and surprise, surprise, we have something for this. So extras would be garlic, oil, you know, the sides. Okay, so that's done here. And now what I want to do is I want to add another message, which will simply confirm. Let's call this confirmation message. And again, descriptions, you put them in. I don't, so no. Let me quickly get the message I want to show. So this time the message will be more complex. So it will say, got it, I added, and now it kind of puts everything that I put on the card into the message. Yeah, so this uses a mix of messages and free marker expressions. Keep in mind what I said before, you always want to use resource bundles. Never type messages directly into the dialog flows as I do here. I do this for the sake, for the interest of time. So make sure that you don't do it. Use resource bundles. All right, so that's it for now. So I will come back to this later on, especially because I will have to fill in this one here. So let's continue with the with the service order pasta. Again, the same layout. And remember what I said, all flows are physically the same. So what I want to do here is I want to create parameters first. So as I mentioned in my library example, we have input parameters, we have output parameters, and this is how subflows should communicate with the parent flows. So what I can do is I can say, okay, create an output parameter. And here what I want to have is I want to have an output parameter called order item out. And in this case, this is a map because you run through the order process, single pasta, and you return an object. So that's a map. Otherwise, it would be a list or a string or one of the primitives that we also have. Okay, so we apply that. Now I go back to my flow. I do have a composite back entity that holds the real world object with this pasta order. So what I can do, add a state. And then there is this little icon that says resolve composite back. So let's click here and say pasta order. Okay. I'm inserting this. Now, the way that it works is that if you point this template or this state to a composite back entity, then it will auto-resolve it. How beautiful is that? So because I didn't create a variable yet, I have this beautiful create button here. So I can create either a skill flow variable or a flow scope variable. I suggest as a best practice not to use skill scope variables because you want to keep this kind of as a black box here. So I use a flow scope variable, which also means that this variable will be reset when I exit the flow, which is good, you know, automatic housekeeping. How great is that? So let's call this one pasta order because it's taking the order. The description, I'm not doing that, but I'm selecting the composite back entity of type pasta order. Okay, so this is what we have. And then we go to variables, set variable state, because once this is done, what I want to do is I want to extract the information that the composite back entity has about the order into an object that eventually I can return to the parent flow. So I'm adding a state, and I already said I want to set a variable, and there is a template for that. So set variable, and let's call this set order item. Set order item. And this now allows me to fill a variable, which, however, doesn't yet exist. So what I want to do is I need to, I can create it from here, but I need to do a change here because just looking at my script, this should have been pasta orders. Okay. And boom, what it does is it actually renames it. Okay, but actually no, just let me quickly check. Okay, set variable, do this. Order, no, this one shouldn't be. But as I said, I'm quickly with changes, but I'm also quickly with undoing my changes. And the nice thing is I don't need to worry. I don't need to search and replace in any YAML document. It quickly works as out of the box. So let's create a variable then from the flow, because all I want to do is I want to create a flow scope variable. And then this is what I want to call order item. Okay, and well, we have an order item variable in the parent flow. Yeah, I created that, but this one is not conflicting because it's in its own memory scope. And that is of type map because I want to send an object. Again, I can use initial values that I can use with JSON or create with an Apache FreeMarker expression. And here's where actually now it wants to have a JSON object. And to save some time, I created this. Now, what I want to point out is this is pure JSON, and you can tell from the double quotes, so they're key value pairs. And as you see, there's an expression that it holds. Now it's pasta order, which is a reference to my composite bag entity. Then it references the quantity, which is the bag item name, and then whatever the attribute is that holds the value. Yeah. So what I can do is I can transform an entity, which is a complex object, into a simple object, just using this state set variable object here. So let's see what it's not happy. It's not happy yet because it doesn't have any transition. And the reason why it's not happy is that because I need to pass a parameter back. Yeah, if I'm not passing a parameter back, then the required parameter that I defined as the output parameter is not fulfilled. But I do this later. So let me just continue creating my flows. So the next one is the order menu. The order menu is where I show you three options: cancel the order, finish the order in the sense that you want to get it delivered, or add another order item. So I need to create this, and I have an good enough. I have an entity for that. So okay, and then add this, add state, and then user messages. One thing I should do is, maybe that makes a lot of sense for you, because if we look at the list menu options, you see that these values are kind of awkward, right? So if I would show those in the value list, then that's not human friendly. So we need to do something better here. So what I did is I used resource bundles for that. So if we look here, go to the resource bundles, and if I search for that, then actually you see that it has a resource bundle entry, and it's called cancel order. And this is human readable. And that's also something I can translate if I have a multilingual bot. So what I need to do is now when I render this, so coming back in here, so I would say add a new start. Now what I will go is I will go to user messaging. So I want to display a message, which is an action menu, which basically is based on a value list entity. So I click on user messages, and there is another item, which is resolve entities, because my order menu is in an entity. And then I have two options. One is where I can declaratively change the output from a list maybe to a carousel, or I just use it out of the box. And that's the plan that I have, where actually, no, I need to use this, because what I want to do is I want to change the label. Yeah, I want to change the label so it points actually to the resource bundle and not directly prints the label. So let's do this, and let's call this display action menu. You see, descriptive state names also make a lot of sense. Now, this declarative option has a little bit of metadata in it, which I don't see if I stay here, but that I can see if I click the edit bot response. But first, what I want to do is I want to map this to the variable. And for this, I create a flow scope variable. And then let's go. I don't know what I call this, but anyway, let's call it. Just need a quick look at my script. Okay, so the variable is action menu. And this is an entity. And this is the menu order options. So how beautiful is that? Yeah, so I don't have to think about what the names is. I just need to look it up. But now it's the point where I need to customize it. So now I click on this one. If this is the first time that you work with Oracle Digital Assistant, this year might come by surprise. But the good news is I can get rid of all of this. This is like an advanced knowledge, and it's documented in our product documentation. So don't worry about what you see here. All that it does is this defines a list of value where it reads the values to display from an entity. Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to change the label. So right now, if I would click action label, then what would happen is it will just print this ugly message that I don't want to see. So what I want to do is I want to change this to use the prepared resource bundle. And given that the resource bundle has the value of the entity values, it's this expression that I need to add. And now we will see a list of value being rendered with beautiful labels. So next step is that now that I have the list of values, I need to do something with it. So the user might either type or might press a button on the values. And I need to make sure that this actually gets then directed to what the user wants. And for this, if that was a live session, I would ask you where I probably would go to. Well, where I go to is, because I want to switch. So I go to flow control. And then I have a switch option here. We talk about this later on. So I select switch, and I can keep that if I want, or I can simply say handle select. As I mentioned, meaningful names are quite good for the reviewers. And I did a lot of skill reviews in the past where most of the time I really spent with trying to understand what people were trying to do. So let's go here. So we have a variable. So we select the variable, which is a flow level variable, and its action menu. And we can create it, but actually what we need to do is I need to create the transition values. So, oops, here we go. So come on. So based on the variable value, I want to transition into something. And what I need to create transitions for is for menu order, cancel, and I need to map this to an event flow, to an end flow. Before talking about end flows, I will go ahead and do this. So I have the first value list entity is menu dot order options. Okay, am I still in the field menu? It's like pinhole surgery here. Options and then cancel. Okay. Should just allow me quickly to verify that I don't have a typo. Order options cancel. Yes, that looks good. So, and this will be added to a new state. And this is an end flow. An end flow is where I leave the current flow, where I exit this flow. So let's call it the cancel end flow. So the next one I need to create is the order options flow where I place the order. And for this, I also create a new separate end flow. I call this like the success end flow. And here I can now put in, so this is like where this, where it would tell me later that I should ask for the address. And there's one more, and that is the add more option. So we have order, we have cancel, and we have the more option. So, okay, so more, and let me quickly create that. And this is another end flow, and that's the more end flow. And so let me just to finish the work on this, so I don't have to go back here. So let's go to this one here. It's the success end flow, and I can return an action. to the parent flow. This action string I want to return. Oops, sorry. Let me just want to first set the action string. Oh, sorry, this one is, you see, I'm mistaken here. I created a switch. So let me create that again. It's let's go here. I knew that something would happen, but with the declarative option, that's not too bad. So now we could put it in, and I think it was order. And we add a state, and this is another end flow, and this is the order end flow. Oops. The order end flow. Let's do this. All right, and now I should have it right. So here we have the first one that is, let's hover the mouse over it, and it should pop up. What's I saying? No, anyway. So we have the order end flow, and here I want to return, instead of done, I want to return order because I want to work with that. And then I do have one here, which is the cancel flow. So that would return cancel. And then I have one which is the more. This is where it's indicate that you want to add additional orders. So, and this is just like what the menu is doing, right? So I'm not having any input parameter. I don't have output parameters here. So that's all that I need to create. So the last thing I want to create quickly, and I only, just trying to save some time here. So I will just create it so that we can test it. So what I will do as well, I will create a state, which is the resolve composite back. And that should prompt for delivery. Okay. Put this in here. And then what we do is create a new variable, and that is CVE delivery contact, and that is of type delivery contact. All right. Okay, so what I do have right now is that I can even partially test it. We see that we have error indicators here. This is because my to-do needs to be created. And here is because I don't end it, and it requires an end flow. So that is what I would need to do first. And after that, I think I would be good to start showing how things work. So we have this. And okay. So let me quickly go to my slides. And apologies for not running it yet by keeping you with the playing, but it doesn't make sense to show something that is like half in the middle of building. So quickly on answer intents. So as I mentioned, answer intents are mapped on the main flow, and you can create a flow to follow up. And what I will do, so I have something to show, I will at least now implement this quickly. So the way that it works is that by default, the answer itself is defined on the intent. And when the intent resolves, then the intent engine will look up the resource bundle where the information is stored for what the information is. So the change here is now that the intent engine will not directly look up the answer. It will actually consult a flow, and the flow will have one state that actually will show that. So that's the next demo, and then you will see something working. So let's create a flow and call it global answers. And I'm not mapping it to an individual intent, though I could, because I want it to respond to any flow. So I'm now going to the main flow here, go to the built-in events, and let's go click on this plus icon here and select what event I want to have. In this case, answer event, and I map it to my global answers flow. So now I can go back to my global answers flow, And all I need is to add a component. Again, we have a template for that. It's in user messaging, multimedia messages, display intent answers. So I don't need to do anything else here. But you can see that now I can add additional states. So if I want to have follow-ups, or even if I want to have something happening before I display the answer, say I want to reprint the question, that's all I could do. But what I want to do is I want to quickly show you how this now works. What are your policies for delivery? So this now does the same thing, but one thing we didn't have before is it now indicates here that we are in a flow. So my base requirement of getting answer intents now handled by a flow is done within 1 minute. So that's good. So I answered that, how to do this. Now we need to talk so I can complete the full demo, and hopefully, and this is where I start crossing my fingers, this full demo then will work. We need to talk about, with all of the flows that I created, how do I assemble this? And for this, we need to talk about flow-to-flow navigation. So there is a component called, or a template called invoke flow. And this invoke flow template has one configuration, which is the name of the flow to navigate into. And then it has input and output options to configure the input parameters that the flow needs to have and the output. So in my case, the order flow has an output parameter, which is the object that represents the food, like the pasta and the details I have. There's one limitation to the invoke flow. You cannot define recursive flows. So I cannot have a subflow calling itself through an invoke flow. That's not going to work. Because what happens is that if you navigate from one flow into another, as indicated here on the left side from top to bottom, on the right-hand side, you see that we are stacking up the individual flows. That means we're preserving the complete state, including the state where you left it. So at the end of a flow, this stacking allows you to go back exactly to where you left it and with everything preserved. And then you can respond to what the output parameter is that you get from the called flow. To leave a flow, you need an end flow. Now, one of the end flow is implicit, and you will see that when you add a new component state, it's always pointing as its next transition to the implicit end flow. Best practice recommendation of mine is to not use the implicit flow, use the explicit flow, because this is, as you could see in my demo already, allows you to return hints to the parent flow about how you exit. Did you exit successfully? Did you exit with a failure? Or did the user cancel it, so that the parent flow knows what to do? Especially if the parent flow is an intent flow, it knows about the context. So it will know it's an order. So it will give the proper message to the user. And then the end flow, the explicit end flow can return values. And this is what we need them for, to return objects from the flow. So now going back to my demo, and now what I want to do is I go here to my order and delete this here. And what I want to do is in here, I want to add an invoke flow. So I want to invoke my service flow. So let's go, so not variable, go to invoke flow. Invoke flow, and this then could be called place order. Place order. Okay, so what is the flow I want to call? It's the service place order. Oh no, sorry, it's not service place order. My bad. It's service rec order pasta. So it's going in here, and I have an output parameter, order item out, and I want to map this to my flow variable order item. So this way, it flows into the place order, and it comes back here. Now, when it comes back, however, I need to check with how it comes back. So I can check for, oops. So it's returning a value. Does it have, let's go to this service flow here. So we have this here, you know, so that's the thing here. So we created the order here. So what we need to do is this guy probably could be canceled. Someone might call cancel while resolving it. So let's add a state, and this state should be an end flow. Let's go flow, end flow, and call it cancel end flow. Cancel end flow, boom. Action name is cancel. And then we go to the end flow and simply say cancel. And because it requires an output value, which is actually not looked at, we just pass an empty. Oops, it's a key, sorry, the key, and then the value could be empty. So just put an empty value because cancel means we don't have an order to deal with. So that's fair enough. And then I want to have another output flow, which we put in here. And this is the flow to end successfully. So success, or we can call it the order flow end or whatever you want. So there's no specific thing. It's just like the contract that you want to have this code either success or order. So let's call it success. Don't mind that. And then here now I have the order item out. So that's the property. And now what I want to map this to is I have the variable order item that actually contains the order as we got it from the composite back entity. And so go here. So the key is order item out. And then I just do, okay, the value that is in this variable should be sent to the parent. And this is done now. But this is doing now something to this order, rec order here, because now we have actions, cancel and success. Yeah. So the what I would do here is that the success one, I would go and map to add order to card. And then if I wanted to handle the failure case, which makes sense, then what I can do is just go here, end flow, just call it cancel end flow. Oops. Should have picked it up. Let me make sure that I'm not doing anything too quickly and quickly wrong here. So this one, add state, end flow. Okay, insert this. And this then actually goes to the cancel flow. If I go to the cancel flow, this is just for now a simple end flow. And I'm, you know, normally what you would do is, so I would pass back this. What you would do normally is add some sort of message that you want to send, where you say, okay, canceled your order. Yeah, you would put it a lot nicer than I do, but transport the message. So now I have this. So basically what happens is when I place an order, then it will add the order to the card and would go to the confirmation message. But what I want to do is I want to ask the user whether the user wants to place another order or finish the order. So what I do here is I add another flow, which is now the invoke menu flow. So this is the action menu. And so I go here, here's the order menu flow. And this one actually then has output transitions, of course, cancel, which is easy because we would just map this to our output, which is the cancel output in our case. Then I could have the more. Now the more flow, I just add to the where is confirm message? Let's see. How did I call that flow? So I want to go back to place order, as simple as that. So I want to kind of loop back into the place order. And that is what we're doing here. So now more, mapping this to the place order. Where are you? There, here we go. So we have this. And then we have another one for which I actually would have. So for the order itself, I would create another end flow, and this end flow would return order. Now, looking at the time, I realize I'm risking to run over. So let me switch to the one I created. And here we have exactly the same picture as I built it. And that was about like I have a custom component here. Then I have the invoke flow, the show action menu here. And that means now I'm ready to run it. So what I can do now is I can say, okay, create, or I'm not creating, I'm ordering. I want to order a pasta. So this one now shows me the list of values because I didn't specify anything in it. So I'm selecting pasta, medium, and then here when asked, I want to have cheese and garlic. How many do I want to have? Well, dinner for two. Let's order two. And this now navigates into this menu. So it's doing an invoke flow. Yeah. So it comes from, so first it calls the custom component because after this one here completes, it goes back into the parent flow, and the parent flow, which knows that this is an order flow, will now call the custom component. And the role of the custom component is just to take the order and save it. It will then say, okay, got it. I added 2 medium bacon pasta with cheese garlic to your orders. And then it shows this menu again. So now if I say, okay, I want to have more pasta. So I can either press the button, and I guess that you trust me that buttons work. So I want to add more. So let's see if entity slotting works. So I click on this one. And then you see that I want more goes back into this. So now I can say spaghetti lasagna. Oh, sorry, bolognese. Spaghetti bolognese in medium with cheese and onions. Okay, firing this up. So you see, I don't have to go through all of the menu items. If I know what I want to have, I can directly step through it. So this now comes back to the menu. I could cancel the order, which I'm not doing. So I say place the order, and it will now start printing me for where I want to have this delivered to. Now, if I go to my intent order rec pasta, then we see that the invoke show menu, it has more and cancel, and I have a next flow, which is, oh, sorry, next is here. The order end flow, basically when I say everything is okay, this will return order to the parent flow. Now the parent flow of this here is the main flow. And on the main flow, I created a specific flow, which is called order, and that I mapped to the place order flow. And this is how, when I finish with my order, I go directly without a new intent into this order flow. So this is how the demo works. And if you're interested, I can share it with you. Just let Daniel or Jürgen know. So quickly to finish up on the slides and then to have some time to answer your questions. How do you access the NLP result variable? For those who are new to Digital Assistant, now everything that the machine resolves is held in a variable called NLP result variable. And in the past and the YAML world, we had a component system intent that filled a variable that you usually named iResult, but that was of type NLP result. And with this, you had access to what is the resolved intent, what are the entities extracted, just in case that your dialog logic needs to work with that. Now, this is different in the visual mode, because in the visual mode, the NLP result now is captured in a system variable. So it's no longer exposed as a custom variable. And for the same reason, system intent is no longer a component available to developers. So on the image, you see that there are two things of interest in the conversation tester. You can access it and expand it and look into. One is event and one is NLP result. So if you want to get access to NLP result, because it's now under the skill, it's a system variable called NLP result. So you can call it skill system NLP result value. Or if you want to know what is the name of the intent that get resolved, skill system event value intent name. And you can see all of the details like the attribute names when you expand it in the conversation flow. So it's kind of visible there. Similar here, if you want to look into what is the intent name that resolved an answer intent. So you can get the answer intent name or the answer intent answer. So this way you can get access to what is the answer that got resolved for a specific intent, just in case you want to render it yourself and you don't want to use the template. And again, there are other things. The config is access to skill parameters, authorized users, that is if you use ODA, or OAuth2, where you can access like access token, everything that got resolved, and just build something very simple, run it in the conversation test, and you can see what the individual properties are. But that's just so that you know that they're now in a different place. So last but not least, quickly, the best practices, and that's what you probably heard and waited an hour for. So best practices, use model-driven conversations. Reason is that with a group of entities, you build real-world entities that can have dependent validation. Yeah, so if say that the vegan pasta is not available in a size of large, yeah, then I can do that in a composite back entity. I could do the same in a dialog flow, but it would be a lot more complex to do so. So if I put it in a composite back entity, then I would do that. Or if you have like someone asking for a gluten-free crust, if it's a pizza order, then you can capture that automatically in a composite back entity, where by default you wouldn't prompt for it, because you would also always assume a regular pizza, right? So the other one is out of order extraction, which is that what I showed you, even when prompted for the pasta menu, what pasta do you want to have? I can give it additional information. That is what you get for free with composite back entity, which is not what you would have with a dialog flow. Entity event handler, and we talked about this in the last session, is like a custom component that allows you to handle programmatically the interactions that a user has with the composite back entity. So every value can be validated by you. And you have a reduced flow length and complexity in the dialog flows. And already with the minimum set of dialogues, you see that the graph of the flow is already quite big, but you can shorten this with using composite back entities. And I recommend you do this. What type of messages? Now in our projects, what we do is to avoid that you have an overload of messages. Imagine like you would have no rules of which message should be printed in which flow. Everyone building a flow will print everything. Yeah. So in the end, the user running it and not knowing that there are 20 flows involved, they would probably see so many prompts that they lose their overview and the interest in working with it. So we made some decisions in our projects, and that is that the top level flow, which we refer to as the intent flow or as the context flow, knows about the context. So this will have context-oriented messages. Now in the play, if for instance, one of the subflows returns cancel because the user canceled the flow, then the intent flow would say, okay, I canceled your order. Now the subflow wouldn't know that it canceled an order because it could have canceled updating an order. Yeah, so it doesn't know that. So the context flow prints the context message, and the service flows, so the called flows, subflows, would only print the messages that are functionally relevant, like printing a prompt for you to select a pasta, or printing an error message if you try to order pasta that doesn't exist. Yeah. Next is use local flow variables. So try to avoid skill level parameters, variables, sorry, not parameters, variables. Well, skill level variables should be used for everything that you need to save beyond the end of a conversation, of an individual conversation. But if you want to leverage this, then what you should do is you should pass that value that the skill level variable has as the input of input parameter using expressions. In our projects, to be honest, we violate this. So we have one skill level variable that is called channel type, which we provision with the system.channel type expression. So this will allow us to create resource bundle messages based on the channel type. And the decision to put this into a skill level variable and not kind of, and always directly accessing it, is because it will not change. So we did this intentionally because this would allow us to determine this, the channel type even based on a condition. So it could be that in a year from now, for one of the skills we built, someone would say, you know what, it's not enough to say this is a MS Teams channel. I want to know if this is the MS Teams channel with that name. And then we can add this easily. This is why we made that decision. But keep this as an exception. Try to always work with input parameters and output parameters. If you define local variables, you will get free housekeeping. Yeah, so when you leave the flow, then everything that you set in the variables will be unset. Naming conventions. So good naming conventions is really required. It's not only required for you so that you know where to find something, but also for the copywriter. I mentioned that the copywriter will better work with the resource bundles, but oftentimes the copywriter needs to understand the context. And this is where they probably need to know where in the flow is it used. So what we do is we have typically the name of the flow and the name of the state as the name of the resource bundle key. And this way, the copywriter has it easy to look something up. So things like that. We have some naming conventions documented in our product documentation. So if you want to have kind of a head start looking into it, but you don't have to adhere to our naming conventions, just get your own. Just think about which persons would benefit from good naming conventions. Peer reviewers, hey, they will love it. Copywriters, they will love it. Conversation designers, they will love it. So think about a good naming convention. So this is what we use. For intent flows, we have the name of the intent plus a prefix of intent. So this way, by looking at the flows, we immediately know what is an intent flow. You could have, for instance, another one, which is intent flow, and you could have top level flow, just in case that you have top level flows that are not intent flows. Yeah, you can do that if you want. And the better the name is and the better the naming convention is that you use for intents, the better the name is for the services as well. Subflows, we always start with service dot. So that means that we indicate they are reusable. So instead of service, you can say reusable if you want, or utility. And then we have global dot for those that are like authorization flows or answer intent flows. This is how we call it. But that's just us. So define a common set of end flow actions. Now, in our projects, every flow will end with at least success, cancel, or failure. So that means that every parent flow would know that at a minimum, they would have to map failure, cancel, and success. If a flow returns additional states, like, I don't know, you have a flow that searches for users, and that's not a failure if the user is not found because the flow worked. So it might return no user found. So then you would add additional. But having a common set of end flow actions that every developer uses makes it very predictable to review flows and to see what flows I have to do. So that's also best practices. As usual, handle the next transition. So the next transition by default is mapped to an implicit end flow. Now, imagine that there is a component or an invoke flow that ends unexpected. something happens that returns an action string that you didn't map. Now, what would happen? It will follow the next transition. So in the midst of a longer conversation, out of sudden, you hit an error that it will try to end the overall conversation. And that's because the next transition is not mapped. If you map it to something considered graceful. So one would be like a save state. So like if you have a menu where the user can choose from, and if the menu, as in my case, would return order, more, or cancel, then the next flow should go back to this action menu. Because if something happens, something unpredictable, then actually it will not fail. It will go back to the action menu. And eventually the user will just click a button and it will continue working. And the other one would be to go to a specific failure end flow, which you can call conversation failure. But users at runtime should never see that, because that should be something that should be caught during testing. Yeah. And that's it. So we are more or less on time, which is great, but I think we should take the time for questions if you have some. So Daniel, if you're still there.
Yes, thank you so much, Frank. So guys, yes, we are a bit over time, but we'll be here for a couple of more minutes. So bring any questions you have to the Q&A, raise your hand on the, raise your hand and we can allow you to bring your question. Just there were a couple of ones already addressed. The main one was the ability to get access to the skill. So I think that's something we can share. Yes. I'll talk with you. We can share that on a follow-up email. Yes. And I think it serves as a basis also for people to explore and see exactly those best practices.
We could do even two things. We could give you the starting skill and the confirmed skill, and you just take the video that we recorded and try to rebuild it.
Work your way into it. That's good. There was another question also, which maybe if you want to add a little bit more to it, in terms of bot-initiated conversations. And the question was, that doesn't seem to work on the visual flow designer. So I was explaining we have a new framework called events, and there's application events as well that support.
Yeah. Did you point to your block entry?
Sorry, say what, Frank?
You've written a block entry about it, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's actually indeed on the Oracle blog, Digital Assistant, one of the latest ones, or the latest one, is exactly about events, which is the new framework to support the bot-initiated conversation. So it's supported, just slightly different approach to it. I would say if there are no more questions, and again, all of these recordings will be available. If there are no more questions, I think we can wrap it up. I don't know if you have anything else to say, Frank.
No, I think I had my 1.5 hours, so I should.
Fantastic. So I just want to say 2 weeks from now, we'll have our next best practice webinar that will focus on, I think the session will be on channels. It will be the 5th session. So I really hope you guys can make the best out of these sessions, and I hope to see you 2 weeks from now. That's it for now. Have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.